I am speaking again with John Sarrouf. We are having a series of conversations about today's political climate, and particularly in our communities, how we continue to have healthy engagement with each other. John is the executive director of Essential Partners. Their work is to build thriving communities strengthened by differences and connected by trust. Today, we are, in John's words, talking about how we reframe political correctness. John, how can we become more sensitive to one another's needs without shutting down conversation and without shaming people?
Such an important question. It's such an important conversation to have because the purpose behind being sensitive in our conversation and the words that we choose is so that we can connect, so that people feel included, and by the way we speak to one another, we feel closer to one another. And what's happening is that the idea or the frame of political correctness has become a dividing point in our culture and our community. And so our words are actually being used to divide us rather than to help connect us. But I think it can be changed. I think if we rethink what political correctness is as an attempt to understand one another and to be sensitive to people's identities, people's understanding of themselves, I think we can overcome this. We have to have a willingness to be sensitive on one side. We have to have a willingness to have grace and understanding and to do the hard work of this connecting on the other side. We have to have some sort of sense of, it could be forgiveness, it could be talked about as grace, it could be talked about as a willingness to not shame and call people out, but bring people along into the language that works for us. So I think on both sides, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think if we get rid of the idea that it's just about being correct, we can go a lot farther.
I think that's really important, is to eliminate that correct word. You're
Yeah.
probably right. But how do you inspire the willingness?
Yeah. Well, I think about the ways in which we want to be named or called. Your name is Heather. And if I said, good morning, Molly, it's nice to see you. And you said, well, my name's Heather. And I said, yeah, whatever. And you'd say, well, no, my name's Heather. And I want to be, it's important to me. It means something to me. And I say, oh, well, that makes sense because I want to be called John. That's my name. And so we're sensitive to that with each other. I think that's what's going on in the world. People are, language is difficult, right? Language often fails us because what one word means to me is it means something different to you. It's just the nature of language. You have a different history with the word, different experience with it. And so it means something different to you than it does to me. The work that we have to do is to close the gap between my understanding and your understanding of the word, or close the gap between what I intended to say and the impact on you, right? And that's what we're trying to do. There's always a gap between what I intend to say and the impact on you. And I own my own intention, you own the impact on you. And the work that we have to do is to close that gap by you saying, gosh, when you call me that name, this is the way I feel from that. And for me to be willing to say, well, I don't want you to feel that way. So what word can I use that more accurately describes who you are or what you want? And so the desire to connect in that way, the desire to be understood or to not be dismissed because I'm using the wrong words, I think people have that innate desire. I don't want to offend people. And most people don't want to go around offending people. They also don't want to live in fear that anything they say is going to be offensive, right? So that's why there's work to do on both sides. There's work for those, for people who are tuning in to new ways of talking or thinking about the world. And there's work to be done by people who are in the process of redefining certain words or articulating certain concepts in ways that says, well, of course, not everybody is going to know this. And so we're going to have to explain it, and we're going to have to be sensitive to people's different levels of understanding of certain concepts or certain words. So we have work to do on both sides, but I think the desire is to connect and be understood. And I think that that's an innate desire, and it's a desire that we all share.
Mm. So do you think the concept of political correctness just undermines that any of those connections? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it's saying there's one way to do this, right? It's the idea that there's a correct way.
Right.
And the fact is, language isn't like that. I mean, there are a very important instance right now, I think, that you'll read a lot about is language around minority populations in our country. So the use of the word African American or Black or people of color, or right, these are different ways of speaking about a group of people that are important to really tune into. But there's different reasons you would use different language, right? At different times. So the idea that, oh no, there's a correct way to do it is part of the problem, because it's actually what might be correct for you might be not correct for somebody else. And so let's get rid of the word correctness, altogether. Political doesn't help at all. Like, let's just actually ask each other honestly, what would it be? What would you like to be referred to in your racial makeup? What would be appropriate for me to say in this moment? And somebody could say, well, I identify as this, and so that's the way I'd like to be referred to. And I'd say, thank you. I appreciate that. It's helpful for me to know that. And now I can meet you there. And then that, whatever word I use doesn't become a barrier. I just want to be understood. I just want to be in communication. At the same time, I was at a training on issues around transgender issues, and the trainer said this beautiful thing. It's one of those things that I've always come back to and think it's really such a beautiful, graceful way of saying. He said, use the language you have, right? That's all you can do. All you can do is use the language you have. Be open to the fact that may have an impact on me that I will speak to you about, that I'll share, that's not a word that I would want you to use about me. But I'm not going to shame you about that. And I don't want you to not talk about this because you don't feel you have the right words. The worst thing we can do is to stop talking about gender issues, race issues, whatever the conversation is. If we stop talking about it, then there's no learning going on. There's no connecting going on. Use the language that you have and be open to learning. Be open to the fact that the impact on the other person may not be what you intended. And then be willing to shift, right? And to say, oh, that's interesting. And I learned that, and now I'll use this other term for you, knowing that may be different for somebody else. Right. And that's why it's difficult and complicated. And it's why it's more about our relationship and the way we relate to each other than trying to find some rule book online that says, oh, these are the right words to use. Because I can guarantee you, A, they'll change in a year or two, and B, they'll change according to person, they'll change according to region, they'll change according to generation. Certain generations will have different words for different things. So we just have to work towards wanting to connect. I mean, that's the goal. We want to connect. We want to understand and be understood. Now let's do the work of navigating our language rather than dismissing people's concerns about their being too sensitive, or dismissing people as being, ignorant or bigoted or not being, we don't want to call people out. We want to just navigate those differences.
Okay, so what you're saying is we should abandon the glossary,
Yes.
okay, so which is, I think, a great idea, and speak with our own language,
Yeah.
to each other, the words that we have for these things.
Yeah.
But now I'm going to ask you, if you possibly can, to give us one example from the aisles of Market Basket. Two people coming together who may be neighbors who bump into each other with their carts, and they've had a little conflict about something. Can you do that? You could make it up if you like.
Right. I'm trying to think of a good one. I'm going to go back for a second and say,
Okay.
it doesn't mean that I'm not saying you shouldn't educate yourself about what the new language is. So I'm not saying you shouldn't look online and say, oh, I get it, that some people are using they as a pronoun for a non-binary gender situation. And okay, that helps me understand, and that there are some other ones too. Okay, I learned that. But what I'm asking people not to do is now make the assumption that that's applies to everybody, because
And
it
there are
doesn't.
rules. Yeah.
And
right.
that there are rules.
Yeah,
Right. Exactly. Right.
Right.
We're just trying. We're all just trying to be more accurate to our own experience of our lives and of who we are and our own identities. So people, if you just can reimagine it as, I'm just trying to have people accurately identify me in the way that I feel about myself. And I, as a participant in that, I'm just trying to, speak about you in ways that honor you and your dignity and the person you are, with the fullness of that, and not to diminish that in any way, because I don't want to change or be flexible in the way I understand some concepts that have been, around for a long time, but are changing. So,
Right.
Okay, so now your question about,
just a real life example, if you got one.
Right. Okay. So here's an example. This was a missed example, I think, an opportunity, not exactly Market Basket, but it was at a university where I was teaching. And what had happened was an older man was talking about, ghettoization and people living in the ghetto. And there was a younger Black woman who heard that and got upset and offended, because the term ghetto in some spaces can be a way of marginalizing sort of the Black community. It's right for a long part of our history, saying ghetto, you live in the ghetto. It's sort of like saying something negative about communities that are living in an area, often because of restrictions, redlining, a whole bunch of issues, and it's a way of marginalizing people in the Black community.
But there have been white ghettos.
Well, there have been white ghettos, and here's the thing. This gentleman was actually talking about, he was an older Jewish man, and he was talking about the ghettos in Europe during World War II, during Nazi Germany, which is also called a ghetto, which is where Jews were forced to live together because they weren't allowed to live outside that area. So here's this moment, right, where two people could have actually connected about a similar experience that their people had suffered through, and been able to share and talk about how this word has changed in its meaning and has different significance to different populations. And instead, what happened is they got upset with each other, closed down, then they stopped talking, and there had to be some repair work done afterwards. But it was the fact that the word itself changed in its meaning and its significance to different populations. So when one person said it, it meant that the other person heard it differently. And they didn't do the work in that moment to navigate that difference. If they had, they would have come to a deeper understanding about each other's history and about the impact of that word. And they would have actually come to a deeper connection about some of their shared identities as being people who have been in situations where the ghettoization of a community has happened. So I don't know if that's
a great example. That's a great example of how language is both sort of this float we live on, and yet it's changing.
Absolutely.
And so the ground beneath us is changing, and we have to, or the raft beneath us is changing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
My metaphor is all wrong, but
that's okay.
But it was a great example. Well, thank you, John, so much. This is really illuminating. So I think the takeaway is, watch your language, but have the willingness. And if you need to, just find your own words, right?
Yeah, yeah. Do the work. Do the work. Be open. That's right. Be open in both directions. Be open to trying. Be open to understanding the impact. Be open on the other side that other people's words are all that they have. And let's keep talking about these things, because if it is used to shut down a conversation, we're going backwards.
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to finish with something I just read in preparing for this interview, and I think it might align with your example. One of the very first usages of the term political correctness was by Hitler, when he was identifying journalists who would be allowed to write for the state, and they had to be politically correct.
Wow, that's fascinating. I didn't know that.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Right.
So words change, their meanings change, right?
They do. Great.
Well, thank you so much, and we look forward to another conversation.
Of course, my pleasure.
Thanks.